The galaxy had always wondered why humanity never spoke of their war god. Every species in the Galactic Council possessed one. The Craxi worshipped Bloodfang, the eternal slaughterer. The Vorthak revered Ironscale, the planet crusher, and even the peaceful Zenari honored Whisperwind, the silent death. These deities of destruction were celebrated, feared, and invoked before every battle. Their temples gleamed with offerings of conquered worlds and fallen enemies. But humans? They mentioned gods of love, wisdom, harvest, and storms. They spoke of creators and protectors, healers and guides. When pressed about their war god during the Council's sacred registry of divine warriors, human delegates would shift uncomfortably and change the subject. Some claimed they had no such deity. Others muttered about complicated history and classified information. The other species began to whisper. Perhaps humanity was weak. Perhaps they had never truly known war. Perhaps their rapid rise through the galaxy was mere luck, and their military victories were flukes against inferior opponents. They were wrong. Humanity did have a war god once. His name was Mars, and he had been the most terrible deity of battle the universe had ever known. But unlike other species who celebrated their war gods, humanity had done something unprecedented in galactic history. They had put their war god on trial. And when Mars failed to meet their standards of honor, strategy, and protection of innocent life, humanity did what no other species had ever dared to do to their divine patrons. They fired him. What the galaxy was about to learn was that when humans go to war without a god of war to hold them back, they become something far more terrifying than any divine being could ever be. They become themselves. Ambassador Sarah Chun stood before the towering crystalline amphitheater of the Galactic Council, her modest human frame dwarfed by the massive alien delegates surrounding her. The Craxi representative, General Thrakmor, rose from his obsidian throne, his four arms gesturing dramatically as his mandibles clicked with barely contained aggression. The human delegation continues to mock this sacred proceeding. Thrakmor's voice boomed through the translation matrix, each word dripping with disdain. For 3 cycles, we have requested the formal presentation of their war god to the divine registry. Every civilized species has complied. Every civilized species honors the ancient traditions. Sarah maintained her diplomatic composure, though she felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. This conversation happened every few months, and each time it grew more contentious. Around the amphitheater, delegates from hundreds of worlds watched with varying degrees of curiosity and suspicion. The Vorthak delegation hissed their approval of Thrakmor's words, while the more reserved Altarian observers simply stared with their large, unblinking eyes. "Honored delegates," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "Humanity appreciates the Council's interest in our spiritual traditions. However, as I have explained previously, our relationship with deities of war is complex." A ripple of discontent passed through the assembly. High Chancellor Veltar of the Centauri hegemony leaned forward, his ethereal form shimmering with agitation. Complex? There is nothing complex about honoring one's war god. The Craxi present Bloodfang's victories over 17 star systems. The Vorthak offer tribute to Ironscale's conquest of the Magellanic rebellions. Even our peaceful Zenari brothers acknowledge Whisperwind's role in their historical conflicts. Yet humans, interjected Commander Zyax of the Mechanoid Collective, his metallic voice creating harmonic overtones, have conquered more territory in the past 2 centuries than most species achieve in millennia. Your military victories are legendary. The Battle of Proxima Ridge, the liberation of the outer colonies, the defense of New Geneva. These achievements surely honor some divine patron of war. Sarah exchanged glances with her aide, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, who had been sitting quietly in the human delegation section. Webb gave her an almost imperceptible nod. They had discussed this moment many times, knowing it would eventually arrive. The truth was becoming harder to conceal. especially as humanity's military reputation grew throughout the galaxy. Perhaps, Sarah said carefully, it would be helpful if I explained our historical perspective on war deities. The chamber fell silent. This was the first time a human delegate had offered any substantive information about their war god situation. Even the usually chattering Fliction observers ceased their musical communications. Sarah activated her holographic display, showing the blue-green marble of Earth floating in the center of the amphitheater. On our home world, we indeed once recognized a deity of war. His name was Mars, known to some of our cultures as Ares. For centuries, we honored him as other species honor theirs. A collective intake of breath, or its equivalent, swept through the assembly. The Craxi delegation leaned forward eagerly, their compound eyes gleaming with interest. Mars was everything a war god should be, Sarah continued, her voice taking on a storytelling cadence that humans had perfected over millennia. He was fierce, relentless, and inspiring to warriors. He demanded sacrifice and rewarded victory. He blessed our weapons and guided our tactics. Then, where is he? Demanded Thrakmor. Why does he not sit among the divine registry? Why do humans speak of him in past tense? Sarah paused, looking around the chamber at the hundreds of alien faces turned toward her. She thought of the classified files in her secure briefcase, the historical documents that detailed humanity's most controversial theological decision, the moment that had changed everything. Because we fired him, she said simply. The silence that followed was absolute. Not a single delegate moved. The translation matrices seemed to stutter, recycling the words as if they couldn't believe what they had processed. Finally, Chancellor Veltar spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? We terminated Mars's position as our war god, Sarah explained, her diplomatic training keeping her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. We found his performance unsatisfactory. The explosion of voices that erupted nearly shattered the chamber's sound dampeners. Delegates leaped to their feet, tentacles waving, wings flapping, and various appendages gesticulating wildly. The Craxi were roaring in disbelief. The Vorthak were hissing what sounded like blasphemy accusations, and the normally serene Altarians were flashing colors Sarah had never seen before. Impossible. Thrakmor's voice cut through the chaos. You cannot fire a god. Gods are eternal. They are divine. They exist beyond mortal judgment. Sarah waited for the uproar to die down before responding. With respect, General, that's where human theology differs from galactic norms. We believe that if we created our gods through worship and belief, we also have the right to hold them accountable. Lieutenant Colonel Webb stood and activated his own holographic display, showing ancient Earth battles and monuments to Mars. The termination wasn't taken lightly, he added, his military bearing commanding attention even among these alien warriors. Mars guided humanity through countless conflicts, from the Punic Wars to the World Wars. But during the global conflicts of the 21st century, we began to question his methods. The display shifted to show devastated cities, refugee camps, and civilian casualties. Mars glorified war for war's sake, Webb continued. He encouraged conflict without considering the cost to innocence. He rewarded brutality over strategy, conquest over protection. When we began expanding into space and encountered other civilizations, we realized that Mars's approach to warfare was primitive. Primitive? General Thrakmor sputtered. War is the ultimate test of strength. Conquest is the highest honor. Your Mars sounds like a proper deity to me. Sarah nodded respectfully. And that philosophy works well for many species, General. But humanity evolved differently. We began to see war not as an end in itself, but as a tool, sometimes necessary, but always regrettable. We wanted a deity who understood the difference between justified defense and senseless aggression. So what did you do? Asked Commander ZYX, his mechanical voice tinged with what might have been curiosity. We held a trial, Sarah said. The Tribunal of Divine Accountability, convened in 2157. Mars was formally charged with negligence in protecting civilian populations, promoting excessive violence, and failing to adapt as guidance to humanity's evolving ethical standards. The chamber erupted again, but this time with a different energy. There was shock, yes, but also a kind of horrified fascination. No species in galactic history had ever put a god on trial. "How does one try a god?" whispered Chancellor Veltar. Webb pulled up another display, showing what looked like a massive courtroom with ornate human architecture. "We established divine jurisdiction protocols," he explained. "Since Mars's power came from human belief and worship, we argued that he was subject to human standards of conduct. We presented evidence from thousands of conflicts, expert testimony from military historians and ethicists, and character witnesses from soldiers and civilians affected by his influence." "And Mars appeared for this trial?" asked the Zenari delegate, speaking for the first time in the session. "Oh yes," Sarah confirmed. "He was not pleased about the proceedings. He argued that war was his domain and that mortals had no right to judge divine actions. He claimed that victory was the only measure that mattered, regardless of how it was achieved." "A reasonable position," muttered several of the more militaristic delegates. "Perhaps," Sarah acknowledged. But that's when the prosecution presented their key evidence. Mars had encouraged the use of weapons that would have rendered Earth uninhabitable. He had pushed for conflicts that would have wiped out entire human populations. His version of victory would have left humanity as scattered survivors on a dead world. Webb added grimly, "The final straw was when Mars advocated for preemptive strikes against the first alien civilizations we encountered. He wanted humanity to attack the Altarians when we made first contact, simply because they were different from us." The Altarian delegate's colors shifted to what Sarah recognized as surprise and concern. First contact with humanity had indeed been peaceful, establishing the foundation for the human-alien relationships that followed. "The tribunal's verdict was unanimous," Sarah continued. "Mars was found guilty of gross negligence and conduct unbefitting a deity responsible for human welfare. His divine status was formally revoked, and he was banished from human worship." But what happened to him?" asked a small delegate from one of the newer species. Sarah and Webb exchanged glances. This was the part they weren't supposed to discuss in detail. "The classified records indicate that Mars didn't take his dismissal well," Sarah said carefully. "There was an incident. He attempted to influence human military leaders to ignore the tribunal's ruling and continue following his guidance. So he tried to continue being your war god without permission?" Commander ZYX asked. "Essentially, yes. But humanity had already moved beyond his influence. Our military leaders, scientists, and philosophers had developed new approaches to conflict resolution and defensive strategy. Mars found that he had no power over humans who no longer believed in his authority." Webb added, "The final confrontation occurred during the Mars colony crisis of 2161, when separatist forces threatened to destroy the terraforming equipment that millions depended on. Mars appeared to colonial military leaders and urged them to respond with overwhelming force that would have resulted in massive civilian casualties." "What did you do?" several delegates asked almost simultaneously. Sarah's voice grew cold, carrying a tone that made several of the smaller species take an involuntary step backward. "We eliminated him." The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't shock or disbelief. This was fear. The assembled delegates were beginning to understand that they were dealing with a species that had not merely disagreed with their war god, but had actually destroyed him. How does one kill a god?" Chancellor Veltar asked, his ethereal form flickering with what appeared to be nervousness. "The same way one creates a god," Webb replied matter-of-factly. "Through collective human will. Every human colony, every military unit, every civilian population was asked to formally reject Mars's authority and withdraw their belief in his power. Within hours, Mars found himself without the faith that sustained his existence. But Surely some humans still believed in him, protested one of the Vorthak delegates. Sarah nodded. A few thousand scattered across the colonies. But it wasn't enough. Gods, we discovered, need a critical mass of believers to maintain their divine status. Below that threshold, they become mortal. And then, pressed General Thrackmore, though his voice had lost much of its earlier bravado. Then, we treated him as we would any other being who threatened human lives, Webb said simply. A joint task force was dispatched to apprehend the former deity. When Mars resisted arrest and attempted to harm the task force members, you killed him, finished Commander ZYX. We eliminated a threat to human safety, Sarah corrected, though the distinction seemed largely semantic. Mars had chosen to become humanity's enemy. We responded accordingly. The implications of this revelation were sinking in throughout the chamber. Here was a species that had not only rejected their war god, but had actively destroyed him when he refused to accept his dismissal. The other delegates began to see humanity's rapid military expansion in a new light. So, said the Zenari delegate slowly, humanity fights its wars without divine guidance. We fight our wars with human guidance, Sarah replied. We developed our own principles of justified conflict, rules of engagement that prioritize civilian protection, and strategies that seek to minimize rather than maximize destruction. We found that human wisdom, combined with human compassion and human ingenuity, serve us far better than Mars's primitive approach ever had. General Thrackmore leaned back in his throne, his four arms falling to his sides. This is why your military victories seem so different, so calculated, so precise. When you remove the divine madness of war worship, Webb explained, you're left with pure human determination and intelligence. We fight when we must, but we fight smart. We protect what matters. We minimize casualties on all sides when possible. And we always remember that the goal of war should be peace. The chamber was quiet as the delegates absorbed this information. Finally, Chancellor Veltar spoke again. This explains much about human behavior in the galaxy. Your reluctance to engage in conquest for its own sake, your focus on defensive rather than offensive capabilities, your tendency to seek diplomatic solutions even with aggressive species. It also explains, added Commander ZYX, why human military forces are so effective. You're not fighting for glory or divine favor. You're fighting with purpose and intelligence. Sarah nodded. Every human who serves in our military knows exactly what they're fighting for. The protection of innocent life, the preservation of human civilization, and the advancement of peace and prosperity throughout the galaxy. These are motivations that no god can corrupt or misdirect. As the session concluded and delegates began filing out of the amphitheater, Sarah couldn't help but notice the changed atmosphere. Where before there had been suspicion about humanity's missing war god, there was now something that looked very much like concern. Because the galaxy was beginning to understand a fundamental truth. A species that could put its own god on trial, find him wanting, and then execute him for inadequate performance was not a species to be underestimated. As she packed her briefcase, Sarah reflected on the conversation. The truth was now out there, spreading through diplomatic channels and alien intelligence networks. Soon, every major power in the galaxy would know that humanity had evolved beyond the need for divine guidance in warfare. What they didn't yet understand was that this made humans far more dangerous than any species that relied on war gods for strength and strategy. They were about to learn that lesson the hard way. 6 months after Ambassador Chen's revelation, the Galactic Council chamber buzzed with a different energy entirely. The delegates who had once questioned humanity's missing war god now gathered in small clusters, speaking in hushed tones about the species that had executed their own deity. But it was General Thrackmore of the Craxi who finally voiced what many were thinking. The humans speak boldly of their godless warfare, he announced during a routine session, his mandibles clicking with renewed confidence. But words are wind, as we Craxi say. Perhaps it is time to test whether their evolved approach to conflict truly makes them superior to those who fight with divine blessing. Admiral Elena Vasquez, the new human military attaché who had replaced the diplomatic team, looked up from her data pad with mild interest. Unlike the previous human representatives, Vasquez carried herself with the easy confidence of someone who had spent decades in actual combat rather than conference rooms. Her augmented left arm, a souvenir from the Titan Station siege, tapped silently against her chair as she listened. Chancellor Veltar's ethereal form shimmered with what might have been concern. General Thrackmore, surely you're not suggesting military action against a council member species? Not against, Thrackmore clarified, his four arms spreading in a gesture of apparent reasonableness. With, the Outer Rim pirates have grown increasingly bold. Their raids threaten multiple trade routes, and their base in the Acheron system has proven problematic for traditional council forces. Commander ZYX's mechanical voice carried harmonics of calculation. The Mechanoid Collective has lost 17 cargo vessels to these pirates in the past year. Our predictive algorithms suggest a 73% probability that standard council response protocols will fail to eliminate the threat. Exactly, Thrackmore continued. I propose a joint operation. Let the humans demonstrate their godless warfare against an enemy that threatens us all. If they succeed where others have failed, then perhaps their theological revolution has military merit. If they fail, the implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the trap being laid. If humanity failed, their credibility would be destroyed, and their rapid rise in galactic politics would be seen as an aberration. If they succeeded, well, at least the pirate problem would be solved. Admiral Vasquez stood slowly, her movement causing several of the more nervous species to take a step back. There was something in her bearing that suggested violence was always just beneath the surface, held in check by discipline rather than divine restraint. Admiral, Chancellor Veltar began, please understand that General Thrackmore's suggestion is merely theoretical. The Council would never presume to... We accept, Vasquez said simply. The chamber fell silent. Even the background hum of life support systems seemed to fade as every delegate processed what they had just heard. I beg your pardon? Thrackmore's voice cracked slightly. We accept your challenge, General. The human fleet will deal with the Acheron pirates. Alone. Vasquez's smile was sharp enough to cut hyperspace. Of course, we'll need full tactical autonomy. No council oversight, no divine consultations, no limitations on our methods beyond basic rules of engagement regarding civilians. General Thrackmore's compound eyes glittered with what looked like anticipation mixed with sudden doubt. The Acheron system pirates weren't ordinary raiders. They were a well-organized force of military deserters, equipped with stolen warships and protected by a maze of asteroid bases that had frustrated every previous council expedition. The pirates number in the thousands, warned Commander ZYX. Their fleet includes at least 40 capital ships, most of them stolen council vessels with full military armaments. They have had 15 years to fortify their positions. Noted, Vasquez replied, making an entry in her datapad. Their leader, Captain Vex High, is a former Craxi general, Thrackmore added, though he seemed less enthusiastic about the challenge now that it had been accepted so readily. He has access to our most advanced battle strategies and divine tactical blessings from Bloodfang himself. Interesting. Vasquez looked up from her pad. Will the Council be providing observers for this operation? Observers? Chancellor Veltar's form flickered with confusion. To verify the results and document our methods. After all, General Thrackmore expressed curiosity about human warfare without divine guidance. This will be an educational opportunity for everyone involved. The Zenari delegate spoke up, her melodic voice carrying notes of concern. Admiral, surely you don't intend to broadcast military operations? There are security considerations. No broadcast, Vasquez agreed. But observer ships from each council species positioned at safe distances with full sensor arrays. Complete transparency. Her smile widened. Unless, of course, there are concerns about what you might witness? The challenge was now reversed. If the council refused to observe, they would appear cowardly. If they agreed, they would be forced to watch whatever the humans had planned for the pirates. Very well, Chancellor Veltar said after a hurried consultation with other delegates. Observer ships will be deployed. When do you intend to begin operations? Admiral Vasquez checked her chronometer. The first human ships should arrive in the Acheron system in approximately 72 hours. We'll begin operations immediately upon arrival. 72 hours? Thrackmore's mandibles clicked in disbelief. But you haven't even received official authorization, planned the operation, assembled forces. General, Vasquez said patiently, the human fleet has been tracking the Acheron pirates for months. We've run detailed tactical simulations, identified their weaknesses, and developed elimination protocols. We were simply waiting for an excuse to implement them. Commander Zoix's optical sensors focused intently on the human admiral. You were already planning to attack the pirates. We were planning to eliminate a threat to galactic shipping, Vasquez corrected. The pirates made the mistake of raiding human cargo vessels 3 months ago. We've been preparing our response ever since. The implications of this statement rippled through the chamber. Humanity had been quietly preparing for war while participating in council discussions about the pirate problem. They had used the diplomatic process as a delaying tactic while organizing their military response. How many ships will you deploy? Asked the Altarian delegate, their large eyes reflecting what might have been fascination or fear. Sufficient ships, Vasquez replied. The exact number is classified, but our tactical analysis indicates that overwhelming force applied with surgical precision will minimize both human casualties and collateral damage. And if you fail? Thrackmore asked, though his voice had lost much of its earlier confidence. Admiral Vasquez's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered behind her eyes. General, we eliminated our own god when he failed to meet our standards. Do you really think a collection of pirates will present a greater challenge? The next 72 hours passed with agonizing slowness in the council chambers. Delegates from across the galaxy monitored their observer ship's approach to the Acheron system, while intelligence networks buzzed with speculation about human military capabilities. Most species had only encountered human forces in defensive situations or police actions. No one knew what humanity looked like when they truly intended to destroy an enemy. The observer ships arrived to find the Acheron system already transformed. Where pirates had once hidden among the asteroids, human vessels moved with geometric precision, their formations unlike anything in galactic military doctrine. Instead of the massive battle lines favored by most species, human ships operated in small, highly mobile units that seemed to dance through space with deadly purpose. Captain Vexhai, the former Craxi general who led the pirates, had indeed prepared for a traditional council assault. His asteroid fortresses bristled with weapons designed to repel frontal attacks, and his fleet was positioned to take advantage of the system's defensive opportunities. His tactics had been blessed by Bloodfang the Eternal Slaughterer, and his confidence was absolute, none of which prepared him for humanity's approach to the problem. The human fleet didn't attack the pirate strongholds. Instead, they simply waited. Their ships took positions throughout the outer system, establishing what appeared to be a loose blockade. No demands for surrender were broadcast. No ultimatums were delivered. The humans just watched and waited. On the observer ships, alien delegates struggled to understand what they were witnessing. The human force appeared smaller than expected, perhaps 20 ships total, though their configurations were unfamiliar. Some vessels seemed to be purely support craft, while others carried sensor arrays that swept the system with methodical precision. "What are they doing?" General Thrackmore demanded, his voice carrying clearly through the diplomatic communication channels connecting the observer ships. Admiral Vasquez's response came from the human command vessel, a sleek ship that bore no resemblance to the massive battleships favored by other species. "We're gathering data." "Data?" This is warfare, not a scientific expedition. General, with respect, this is human warfare. We don't fight until we understand our enemy completely. For 6 hours, the human ships continued their surveillance. Their sensors mapped every asteroid, cataloged every hidden weapons platform, and tracked every pirate vessel. The observer ship crews watched with growing confusion as nothing resembling actual combat occurred. Then, Captain Vexhai made his first mistake. Frustrated by the humans' apparent passivity, he ordered a squadron of his fastest ships to probe their defensive perimeter. It was exactly the kind of aggressive move that Bloodfang would have blessed, a bold strike to test enemy strength and demonstrate pirate courage. The pirates' ships never made it within weapons range of the human perimeter. Instead, they simply vanished. One moment, they were accelerating toward the human formation. The next, they were gone, leaving only expanding clouds of molecular debris. "What happened to them?" demanded Commander Zoix, his mechanical voice carrying urgent harmonics. "Kinetic interceptors," Admiral Vasquez replied calmly. "Magnetically accelerated tungsten projectiles, fired from maximum sensor range. The pirate ships were destroyed before they knew they were under attack." The observers digested this information with varying degrees of comprehension. Most galactic species relied on energy weapons or guided missiles for ship-to-ship combat. The idea of using simple projectiles fired at relativistic velocities was both primitive and terrifyingly effective. Captain Vexhai's second mistake was attempting to retreat deeper into the asteroid field. The human sensors had already mapped every hiding place, and what followed could only be described as systematic extermination. Human ships appeared at precisely calculated positions, fired their kinetic weapons with mathematical precision, and vanished again before return fire could be targeted. The pirates found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere, striking with perfect accuracy and disappearing like ghosts. Their asteroid fortresses, designed to withstand frontal assaults, proved useless against attacks that came from unexpected angles and used weapons that traveled too fast to track. "This is not warfare," protested General Thrackmore. This is calculation." "Yes," agreed Admiral Vasquez. "Human warfare is applied mathematics with lethal results. We don't rely on divine inspiration or battlefield courage. We use physics, engineering, and tactical analysis to eliminate threats with maximum efficiency." The systematic destruction of the pirate fleet continued for another 4 hours. Each engagement lasted only minutes, sometimes seconds. The humans would appear, fire their kinetic weapons, and withdraw before the pirates could mount an effective response. There was no glory in it, no dramatic ship-to-ship duels, no heroic sacrifices. There was only the mathematical application of overwhelming force to eliminate a designated target. When Captain Vexhai himself finally fell, his flagship reduced to component atoms by a perfectly calculated kinetic strike, the surviving pirates attempted to surrender. They broadcast on all frequencies, offering to lay down their weapons and submit to council justice. The human response was swift and uncompromising. "Surrender not accepted," Admiral Vasquez announced. "You have threatened human lives and property. The elimination order stands." "But they're surrendering," protested the Zenari delegate. "Surely your evolved sense of warfare includes provisions for mercy." "Our evolved sense of warfare includes provisions for protecting innocent lives," Vasquez replied. "These pirates have murdered hundreds of civilian spacers, including 12 humans. They have forfeited any claim to mercy." The destruction continued until no pirate ship remained functional. The human fleet then turned its attention to the asteroid bases, methodically reducing each fortification to rubble with the same clinical precision they had used against the mobile forces. There were no survivors because the humans had calculated that survivors represented an unacceptable risk of future pirate activity. When the operation concluded, the Acheron system was clean. No trace remained of the pirate presence that had plagued galactic shipping for 15 years. The asteroids have been swept clear, the hidden bases have been obliterated, and every single pirate ship had been reduced to its component molecules. The human fleet withdrew as methodically as it had arrived, leaving behind only empty space and the shocked observer crews from the Council species. In the stunned silence that followed, it was Commander ZYX who finally voiced what everyone was thinking. They didn't just defeat the pirates. They erased them. Completely. General Thrackmore's compound eyes reflected a kind of horrified understanding. This is what happens when a species fights without divine restraint, without the honor codes that gods impose, without the limitations that make war, war. Admiral Vasquez's final transmission to the observer ships carried a note of what might have been amusement. Delegates, you express curiosity about human warfare without divine guidance. I trust this demonstration has been educational. The human fleet will file its after-action report with the Council within 48 hours. As the human ships disappeared into hyperspace, the observer vessels were left alone in a system that had been completely sterilized of threats. The speed, efficiency, and ruthless completeness of the human operation had shattered every assumption the galactic community held about warfare and divine guidance. They had asked to see what humans could do without a war god to guide them. Now they knew, and that knowledge was terrifying. The aftermath of the Acheron operation sent shockwaves through every corner of galactic civilization. Within days, intelligence reports flooded into capital worlds across known space, carrying detailed analyses of human military capabilities that painted a picture far more disturbing than anyone had imagined. The species that had executed their own war god had demonstrated something that no amount of divine blessing could match: the terrifying efficiency of pure, calculated violence. On the Craxi homeworld of Thrackitl, General Thrackmore stood before the Crimson Council, the highest military authority of his species. The massive chamber, carved from the living rock of their ancestral mountain, echoed with the nervous clicking of mandibles as he delivered his report. Above them all, the statue of Bloodfang the Eternal Slaughterer seemed to glare down with ruby eyes, as if questioning how his blessed warriors could be so thoroughly outclassed. The human tactical approach defies every principle of honorable warfare, Thrackmore began, his voice lacking its usual confidence. They studied their enemy for hours before engaging, using sensors and calculations instead of divine inspiration. When they did attack, it was with weapons that travel faster than thought itself. Simple metal projectiles accelerated to near-light speed. War leader Grixty H, ancient and scarred from 100 battles, raised one of her forearms. Surely Bloodfang's wisdom guided our blessed Captain Vexhai in defense against such cowardice? The humans never gave him the chance to receive divine guidance. Thrackmore replied grimly. Their attacks came without warning, without honor, without the ritual challenges that allow gods to bless their champions. Vexhai died before he even knew he was under attack. The council chamber fell silent, except for the nervous clicking that seemed to echo from every direction. Finally, war leader Krexval spoke, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. You speak as if these humans have found a way to wage war that makes our gods irrelevant. I fear that is exactly what I'm saying, Thrackmore admitted. They have eliminated the spiritual element from warfare entirely. No prayers, no rituals, no divine inspiration. Just mathematics and physics applied with lethal precision. Meanwhile, on the crystal spires of the Vorthak homeworld, Supreme Commander Histak was delivering a similar report to the Scale Council. The reptilian warriors who had conquered dozens of worlds under the guidance of Iron Scale the Planet Crusher listened with growing unease as their intelligence chief described human capabilities. The humans used no boarding actions, no ship-to-ship combat, no opportunity for individual heroics blessed by our gods. Histak explained, his scales shifting to colors that indicated deep concern. They simply calculated the most efficient way to destroy their enemies and implemented that calculation with perfect execution. Council Prime, Saraxhan hissed softly, her ancient scales bearing the ceremonial scars of countless divine blessings. But surely they suffered losses? Even the most blessed warriors expect casualties in battle. Zero human casualties, Histak replied, his words falling into the chamber like stones into still water. Their method of warfare appears designed to eliminate all risk to their own forces while guaranteeing the complete destruction of their enemies. The implications rippled through galactic intelligence networks like a virus. Every species began reevaluating their military doctrines, their reliance on divine guidance, and their assumptions about human capabilities. Emergency sessions were called in capital cities across the galaxy as leaders grappled with the reality of a species that had weaponized pure, rational thought. On the ethereal plains of the Centauri hegemony, Chancellor Veltar convened an unprecedented gathering of the Consciousness Council. His fellow energy beings flickered with distress patterns as they absorbed the intelligence reports from their material realm observers. The humans have achieved something we thought impossible, Veltar communicated through harmonic resonance. They have created a form of warfare that is completely predictable, completely rational, and completely terrifying in its efficiency. Fellow Chancellor Mirandal's form pulsed with confusion. But without divine guidance, how do they know they are fighting for righteous causes? How do they distinguish between just and unjust wars? According to their statements, they make those determinations themselves, Veltar replied. They claim to fight only in defense of innocent life and the preservation of civilization. But they define those terms according to their own moral framework, not divine commandment. The concept was almost incomprehensible to species that had relied on war gods for millennia. The idea that mortals could make such decisions without divine input challenged the fundamental assumptions of galactic civilization. But it was in the war rooms and strategic planning centers that the real implications began to sink in. Military analysts across the galaxy ran simulation after simulation, trying to find weaknesses in the human approach to warfare. What they discovered was even more disturbing than the Acheron operation itself. Commander ZYX, back on the Mechanoid Collective's primary processing station, interfaced directly with their most advanced tactical computers. His mechanical consciousness absorbed terabytes of combat data as he analyzed every aspect of the human military demonstration. The efficiency parameters are unprecedented, he reported to the Collective's Central Processing Authority. Human warfare appears optimized for complete threat elimination with minimal resource expenditure. Their tactical doctrine shows no provision for glory, honor, divine favor, or any of the traditional motivations for combat. The Central Processing Authority's collective voice hummed through the station's data networks. Analysis: what motivates human military action if not divine guidance or traditional warrior culture? Unknown, ZYX admitted, a rare confession of ignorance from a mechanoid. Their stated objectives include protection of innocent life, preservation of their civilization, and advancement of galactic peace. However, their methods suggest a willingness to use extreme violence to achieve these goals. Paradox detected. How do they define innocent without divine moral guidance? They appear to use their own judgment, ZYX replied, which makes them potentially the most dangerous species in the galaxy. As intelligence reports accumulated, patterns began to emerge that painted an even more troubling picture. Human military technology, it turned out, was specifically designed for the kind of warfare they had demonstrated at Acheron. Their ships were built for speed and precision rather than durability and direct combat. Their weapons were optimized for long-range strikes that eliminated enemies before traditional combat could begin. Most disturbing of all, their doctrine appeared to be based on the assumption that any species capable of threatening human interests should be completely destroyed rather than simply defeated. The realization struck different species at different times, but when it came, it was always the same. Humanity wasn't just fighting wars differently than everyone else. They were fighting wars with the goal of never having to fight the same enemy twice. on the peaceful garden world of Zenari Prime. The Harmony Council struggled to comprehend reports that challenged their fundamental understanding of conflict. The musical beings who had achieved interstellar civilization through cooperation rather than conquest found themselves facing questions they had never needed to ask. The human approach to warfare appears to contradict their stated preference for peace, noted conductor Swam Piechanya, her melodic voice carrying undertones of confusion. They claim to fight only when necessary, yet their methods ensure total destruction of their enemies. Perhaps, suggested conductor Harmonius, this is precisely why they fight so rarely. If each conflict results in the complete elimination of the threat, there is no need for ongoing military action. The logic was sound, but it raised troubling questions about what humanity might do to species that continued to threaten galactic peace after diplomatic solutions had been attempted. These concerns reached a crescendo when the Draconian Empire, one of the most aggressive and militaristic civilizations in the galaxy, announced their intention to test human military capabilities directly. Emperor Vexthal the Conqueror, blessed by 6 different war gods and ruler of 47 conquered worlds, declared that humanity needed to be properly evaluated as a potential threat to galactic stability. The announcement sent panic through diplomatic channels. Unlike the pirates, the Draconian Empire was a legitimate galactic power with massive fleets, well-trained soldiers, and the direct blessing of multiple war deities. If they chose to engage humanity in open warfare, the results could destabilize the entire galaxy. Admiral Vasquez received the Draconian Declaration while reviewing tactical reports in her office aboard the human command ship Prometheus. Her aide, Colonel Sarah Park, watched nervously as the Admiral read the formal challenge that had been broadcast across all diplomatic channels. "They want a demonstration," Vasquez said finally, setting down the data pad with deliberate care. "Emperor Vexthal has formally declared his intention to invade human space to assess our military capabilities for the protection of galactic civilization. How do we respond?" Park asked. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, staring out the viewport at the stars. When she spoke, her voice carried the same cold certainty that had characterized the Acheron operation. "We respond the same way we responded when Mars challenged our authority," she said. "We eliminate the threat completely." Colonel Park felt a chill run down her spine. The Draconian Empire controlled hundreds of worlds and commanded fleets that numbered in the thousands. They had been expanding their territory for centuries, blessed by war gods whose power was legendary throughout the galaxy. "Admiral," she said carefully, "the Draconians aren't pirates hiding in an asteroid field. They're a major galactic power with military traditions dating back millennia. Their emperor claims direct divine lineage from the god of eternal conquest." Vasquez turned from the viewport, her augmented arm flexing slightly as she considered the tactical challenge. "Colonel, what did we learn when we put Mars on trial? That gods can be held accountable for their actions?" "We learned that gods only have as much power as mortals give them," Vasquez corrected. "Mars claimed divine authority over human warfare, but when humans withdrew their belief in that authority, he became just another being who could be eliminated when he threatened human interests." The implications hit Colonel Park like a physical blow. "You're planning to do the same thing to the Draconian war gods." "I'm planning to demonstrate that human warfare doesn't require divine approval," Vasquez replied, "and that gods who bless aggression against humanity will face the same fate as gods who fail to protect human interests." Within hours, orders went out through classified channels to every human military installation in the galaxy. The message was brief and direct. Operation Divine Judgment authorized. All units prepare for unrestricted warfare protocols. Across human space, ships that had never been seen by alien eyes began emerging from hidden bases. These weren't the vessels that had participated in the Acheron operation. Those had been reconnaissance units designed for precision strikes against small targets. What emerged now were the ships humanity had built for total warfare against peer opponents. The Draconian Empire had challenged humanity's right to exist as an independent military power. They were about to learn why no other species had dared to make such a challenge. As Admiral Vasquez prepared humanity's response, she reflected on the path that had brought them to this moment. They had tried diplomacy, had participated in galactic civilization, had even revealed the truth about their relationship with their war god in the hopes of building understanding. But the galaxy had interpreted humanity's honesty as weakness and their restraint as inadequacy. The Draconians and their war gods had decided that humans needed to be conquered and controlled for the greater good of galactic civilization. They were about to discover that humanity had evolved far beyond the need for war gods precisely, because human warfare, without divine restraint, was something the universe had never seen before. And once they saw it, the Draconian Empire, along with every other species watching, would understand why humans had found it necessary to execute their own deity. Some forms of power were too dangerous to leave in the hands of gods. Emperor Vexthal the Conqueror stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Divine Wrath, surrounded by the symbols of 47 conquered civilizations. Each trophy represented worlds that had fallen to draconian might, blessed by gods whose names were spoken in fearful whispers across the galaxy. The massive dreadnought, blessed by 6 different war deities and crewed by warriors whose genetic lines traced back to legendary conquerors, represented the pinnacle of divine military power. The human response is peculiar, reported War Commander Thexanel, his scales displaying the ceremonial patterns that indicated confusion. They have withdrawn all civilian shipping from the border regions and evacuated their outer colonies. It appears they are retreating. Vexthal's laugh was like grinding metal, enhanced by cybernetic implants that have been blessed by the god of eternal conquest himself. Of course they retreat. They have seen the might of the Draconian Armada and recognize their inferiority. Perhaps we will not need to demonstrate divine power after all. The Emperor's confidence was understandable. The Draconian invasion fleet consisted of over 3,000 capital ships, each blessed by multiple war gods and crewed by warriors bred for conquest. Their battle doctrine had been perfected over centuries of expansion, and their divine backing was absolute. No force in galactic history had ever successfully resisted a full Draconian invasion. But Admiral Elena Vasquez, monitoring the Draconian advance from her command ship deep in human space, had different plans entirely. The evacuation of border regions hadn't been a retreat, it had been preparation. When humanity fought without divine restraint, collateral damage became an unacceptable risk. Better to ensure that no innocent lives stood between humanity and its enemies. Admiral, reported her tactical officer, Commander Chun, all civilian populations have been evacuated from the projected combat zones. The Draconian fleet is maintaining standard invasion formation approximately 48 hours from the Kepler defense line. Vasquez nodded, her augmented fingers dancing across tactical displays that showed information no other species possessed. Human intelligence had been studying the Draconian Empire for decades, analyzing their tactics, their technology, and, most importantly, their religious practices. The coming operation would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Status of Operation Divine Judgment? She asked. All systems operational, Chen replied. The Quantum Disruption Network is online across 17 star systems. Temporal distortion fields are calibrated and ready. The God-Killer protocols have been uploaded to all combat units. Vasquez allowed herself a small smile. Humanity had learned much from their trial and execution of Mars. The techniques developed to strip a deity of divine power had been refined and weaponized over the decades, though they had hoped never to use them. The Draconian Empire's reliance on divine blessing was about to become their greatest weakness. Initiate first phase, she ordered. Begin theological warfare protocols. Across human space, installations that looked like massive radio telescopes began broadcasting on frequencies that existed outside normal space-time. These weren't communications in any conventional sense, They were targeted disruptions of the metaphysical connections between the Draconian war gods and their mortal followers. The same techniques humanity had used to sever Mars's connection to human believers were now being applied to an entire empire's worth of divine relationships. On the divine wrath, the first signs of trouble began with the ceremonial shrines. War Commander Thekael was conducting the pre-battle ritual when the blessed flames that had burned for centuries suddenly guttered and died. The sacred symbols that decorated the bridge began to dim, and the cybernetic implants that channel divine power started to malfunction. "What is happening?" Vexthal demanded, his voice carrying a note of confusion that hadn't been there moments before. The direct connection to the god of eternal conquest that had guided his decisions for decades was fading. "Unknown, my emperor," Thexael replied, though his own blessed weaponry was beginning to feel strangely heavy in his claws. "The divine presence seems to be withdrawing." This scene was repeated across the entire Draconian fleet. Warriors who had never fought without divine guidance found their blessed equipment failing, their God-granted abilities fading, and their absolute confidence beginning to crumble. The gods themselves seemed to be abandoning their chosen people in their hour of greatest need. But the gods weren't abandoning anyone. They were being systematically stripped of their power by human technology that treated divine authority as just another form of energy that could be disrupted, channeled, or destroyed. "Admiral," Commander Chun reported from the Prometheus, "theological warfare protocols are showing full effectiveness. Draconian divine connections are being severed at the calculated rate. We estimate complete metaphysical isolation within 6 hours." "Excellent," Vasquez replied. "Begin Phase 2. Deploy the reality anchors." Throughout the volume of space between human territory and the advancing Draconian fleet, devices that resembled crystalline sculptures began materializing. These weren't weapons in any traditional sense. They were instruments that enforced specific laws of physics within their area of effect. Gods and other divine beings required a certain flexibility in natural law to manifest their power. The reality anchors eliminated that flexibility entirely. Emperor Vexthal felt the change like a physical blow. The divine presence that had guided his empire's expansion for centuries was suddenly absent, not withdrawn, not angry, but simply not there, as if it had never existed at all. "War Commander," he roared, his voice now purely biological without its cybernetic enhancements. "Contact the Divine Conclave. Demand an explanation for this abandonment." But Thexanael was staring at his communication equipment with growing horror. "My Emperor, the Divine Conclave is not responding. In fact, our equipment cannot locate the Divine Conclave at all. It's as if the gods no longer exist." The realization that swept through the Draconian fleet was like a plague of despair. Warriors who had never questioned their divine backing found themselves facing an enemy while completely cut off from the source of their power and confidence. Their blessed weapons became ordinary metal, their divine armor offered no special protection, and their God-granted tactical insights vanished like morning mist. Admiral Vasquez watched the Draconian formation begin to waver on her tactical displays. Ships that had maintained perfect alignment for decades were starting to drift as their crews struggled with equipment that no longer responded to divine commands. The psychological impact was devastating. An entire military force that had never learned to fight without God-granted advantages was discovering what it meant to be truly alone. "Phase 3, she ordered. "Begin demonstration protocols." What happened next would be remembered throughout galactic history as the day an entire species learned to fear human ingenuity. The ships that emerged from human space weren't the precision craft that had eliminated the Acheron pirates. These were vessels designed for total warfare against peer opponents. Massive, angular constructions that seemed to bend light around their hulls. But it wasn't their size or appearance that shattered Draconian morale. It was their weapons. The first Draconian ship to die was the Blessed Conqueror, a heavy cruiser that had participated in the subjugation of 17 worlds. It simply ceased to exist, converted to its component atoms by what human scientists called a molecular dissolution beam. There was no explosion, no debris field, no chance for survivors. One moment it was there. The next, it was a cloud of constituent particles expanding into space. Impossible, breathed War Commander Thexanel, staring at the tactical display. What weapon can completely atomize a ship that size? The same kind of weapon that eliminated our god, replied a voice that didn't belong to anyone on the Draconian bridge. Every screen on the Divine Wrath suddenly displayed the face of Admiral Vasquez, her expression carrying the same cold certainty that had characterized humanity's execution of Mars. Around her, the Draconian fleet could see the interior of a human command ship that looked more like a scientific laboratory than a military vessel. Emperor Vexthal, Vasquez said, her words being broadcast simultaneously to every ship in the Draconian fleet. You declared your intention to invade human space to assess our military capabilities. Consider this assessment complete. Human, Vexthal snarled, his voice carrying centuries of imperial authority. You dare to interfere with divine war? The gods themselves have blessed this conquest. Your gods no longer exist, Vasquez replied matter-of-factly. We have severed their connection to this reality and dissolved their manifestations. They are as dead as Mars. The silence that followed was broken only by the background noise of failing Draconian equipment. Across the invasion fleet, warriors who had built their entire identity around divine favor stared at screens showing a human who spoke of destroying gods as casually as others might discuss eliminating pirates. You're lying, Vexthal said, though his voice lacked conviction. Gods cannot be destroyed by mortals. Gods are created by mortal belief and sustained by mortal worship, Vasquez explained patiently. When sufficient mortals withdraw their belief, gods become vulnerable. When they become vulnerable, they can be eliminated. We learned this when we put Mars on trial for inadequate performance. To demonstrate her point, Vasquez gestured to someone off-screen. A moment later, another Draconian ship, the Divine Retribution, simply vanished, leaving not even atoms behind. Your military doctrine relies on divine blessing for tactical guidance, equipment enhancement, and warrior morale, she continued as if nothing had happened. Without that divine connection, you are operating at perhaps 10% of your normal capabilities. Meanwhile, human forces are operating at full capacity using technology and tactics that have never required divine intervention. Emperor Vexthal found himself in a situation no Draconian ruler had faced in over a millennium: complete helplessness. His fleet was crippled, his gods were gone, and his enemy was demonstrating capabilities that rendered traditional warfare obsolete. What do you want? He asked, the question tasting like poison. Your complete and unconditional surrender, Vasquez replied, followed by the immediate withdrawal of all Draconian forces to your pre-expansion borders. Your empire will cease all aggressive military actions against other species and submit to human oversight of your military capabilities. The terms were devastating. The Draconian Empire would be reduced to a shadow of its former self, transformed from a galactic superpower into a monitored territory under human control. And if we refuse? Vexthal asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Then, we eliminate your species entirely, Vasquez said without a trace of emotion. The same way we eliminated your gods. Complete molecular dissolution of every Draconian world, every ship, every individual. Total extinction carried out with the same precision we used to destroy the Acheron pirates. The threat hung in space like a dark star, its implications rippling through every Draconian mind. This wasn't the boastful rhetoric of traditional warfare. It was a calm statement of capability backed by demonstrated results. You cannot, whispered War Commander Thexal. The galaxy would never allow such genocide. Admiral Vasquez's expression didn't change. The galaxy has observed two demonstrations of human military capability. First, we eliminated a pirate force that had resisted Council forces for 15 years. Second, we dissolve the gods of the most militarily powerful empire in known space. The galaxy will allow whatever we determine is necessary for the protection of innocent life and the advancement of galactic peace. Around the Draconian fleet, observer ships from every major galactic power watched in stunned silence as humanity negotiated the surrender of a force that had been considered invincible. The casual display of God-killing technology and species-ending threats was reshaping every assumption about power, warfare, and survival in the galaxy. Emperor Vexthul looked around his bridge at warriors who had never known defeat, who had conquered worlds in the name of divine glory, who now stared at their emperor with the hollow eyes of beings whose entire worldview had been shattered in a matter of hours. "We surrender," he said finally, each word feeling like it was being torn from his throat. "Excellent," Vasquez replied. "Human oversight teams will arrive within 48 hours to begin the transition process. Your cooperation will ensure that this proceeds smoothly for all involved." The transmission ended, leaving the Draconian fleet alone with their defeat and the galaxy alone with its new understanding of human capabilities. In command centers across known space, military leaders stared at intelligence reports that would redefine interstellar politics for generations to come. Humanity had not merely won a military victory. They had demonstrated that they possessed the technology and willingness to eliminate gods, dissolve fleets, and extinct entire species when they determined such actions were necessary. The species that had put their own war god on trial for inadequate performance had proven that they were the most dangerous force in the galaxy precisely because they fought without divine restraint. As Admiral Vasquez prepared the occupation protocols that would transform the Draconian Empire into a human protectorate, she reflected on the path that had brought humanity to this point. They had tried to coexist peacefully with species that relied on war gods for guidance and strength. They had revealed their history honestly, hoping to build understanding. But the galaxy had seen honesty as weakness and restraint as inadequacy. They had demanded demonstrations of human military power, never realizing that humanity had spent centuries developing capabilities that made traditional warfare obsolete. Now they knew. The species that had executed their own god for failing to meet their standards had proven that human warfare, without divine intervention, was something the universe was not prepared to face. The age of war gods was ending. The age of human hegemony had begun. And across the galaxy, in temples and shrines and sacred places where other species worshipped their own deities of war, nervous prayers were being offered to gods who were suddenly, desperately hoping that humanity would never find them inadequate.